God has told you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God. There's a legend at Princeton Seminary about a final exam for the Introduction to New Testament class. I don't know if it actually happened, but I know that it's true. The students, earnest and hardworking, each of them, had spent the semester reading through the New Testament. They learned about the creation and the construction of the Gospels, about the Q source, about how to tell the difference between a genuine Pauline epistle like Romans and a pseudo-Pauline epistle like Ephesians. They learned about the context of the ancient Near Eastern world and put it in conversation with the theological underpinnings of the Greco-Roman and Judaic worlds. In other words, they got it. They understood. They took in a lot of information and felt ready for the exam. And for those couple of weeks leading up to the exam, they did their very best to review the material, go back over their notes, go to those late night study sessions like you do. And so they thought they were ready, and on that day of the exam, they sat there with their blue books in hand, their pencils sharpened, and their minds full, ready to pour out all that they had learned. The professor walked into the classroom, set down his briefcase, took off his jacket, and said to the students, "You've spent the entire semester reading through the New Testament, trying to really grapple with the gospel of Jesus Christ. I have only one question for you for this final." Then he walked over to the board and he wrote, "What are the names of the people who clean this room at night?" As the legend goes, nobody passed. God has told you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God. Well, friends, we've come to it, the third and final week of our sermon series on living our vision, Do More Good. Over the last couple of weeks, we have cussed and discussed do and more, and now we find ourselves with that final word, good. To be honest, it's the one we were looking most forward to. We think we have a pretty good grasp on good. We were bound to get here eventually. But now that we are, it does seem a little harder than we thought. As we try and struggle with that word, we think, well, we know what good is, you know. It's good, like not bad. Not like not bad, but like not bad. Only now that we think about it, it's not just not bad, it's good, right? John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist movement, seemed to understand this dilemma. See, as he was trying to make sense of what does it mean to be a disciple of Jesus Christ, what does it mean to love God and love neighbor in this world, he thought it might be helpful to offer a couple of basic rules. He offers 3 rules for Christian living, and the first one sort of keys off of that not bad kind of logic, which was simply, do no harm. The first rule is do no harm. It asks each of us to just take a look in the mirror for a moment, to stop, pause, go back through our week, to think about the way that we spend our lives, and to make sure that we are not intentionally or unintentionally causing harm. Yes, at a basic level, this is about not kicking or biting or pinching. It's about not saying mean things, whether in person or online. But the truth is, most of us learned those things in kindergarten, even if we need a refresher every once in a while. No, at a basic level, the most basic level, it is about no kicking and biting or speaking unkindly about other people, but there is more than one level. And like Candy Crush, it just gets harder as you move along. Yes, it's about not biting or kicking. But it asks for that much harder thing, which is to look at those systems and institutions and structures that we're a part of, and to make sure that they do no harm either. In other words, it asks us to work towards justice. What does the Lord require of you? It asks us to look for those just aspects of our life, to make sure that our lives are just, that the way we're spending our time, our money, our energy is just. And if not, to make some adjustments. In some ways, that's what this parable for today, this strange, bizarre little parable, one of the weirdest in the gospel. It's that parable of the dishonest manager. It's about a manager who's squandering the owner's property, and just before he's fired, goes and meets with each of the clients and seemingly haphazardly cuts their debts. It's a nice thing to do, but it's also stealing. And then to make it even more strange, Jesus says to his disciples, "Make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into their eternal homes." Make friends for yourself by means of dishonest wealth. We scratch our heads, we read over it again, and as we go back through it again and again, suddenly we realize that he's being tongue-in-cheek, that he's being a little sarcastic in this moment. Maybe he had a bad day. He's throwing a little shade at those who would make friends for themselves by means of dishonest wealth. He's saying, yeah, make friends for yourself that way so that someone will welcome you. Give everything you got to that thing and pray that it will be there to hold you when you inevitably fall. He was taking a look at the way that people spend their time and reminding them that we cannot serve God and wealth. We cannot serve God and wealth, not because money is inherently evil, but because of who we are too often willing to sacrifice in order to get it. Because of the way in which we're able to turn people into things on our way to accumulate that stuff. Because of our willingness to make people into means to an end, as opposed to an end in and of themselves. He's saying, do no harm. Pay attention to the people God has placed in your life and treat them in their fullness. Find a way to engage with them on a soul-to-soul basis. Don't treat them as objects. You cannot serve God and wealth. At some point, we will all have to make a choice. Do no harm. That, of course, is the first rule for Christian living, at least according to John Wesley. The second one, though, follows. We can't stop with doing no harm. It is also compelling and upon us to do good. Which brings us back to where we started. What is good? Micah offers us one response: to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with our God. That is, to never be so sure that we're right, that we're willing to do wrong. Something that churches could afford to remember. but it's hard to picture, isn't it? We know good when we see it. We just need an example sometimes before us. This past year, we have once a month tried to highlight a different hidden figure. We've tried to lift up someone who's trying to live out that call of Jesus Christ, whether they articulated it that way or not, someone who was trying to do more good in this world. We heard the stories of Francis Asbury and the Harlem Hellfighters. We heard about some of the people behind some of our favorite Christmas carols. We learned about the origins of the Dining and Caring Center and the Storehouse and the You Are Well Clinic. We heard about Claudette Colvin and Dorothy Day and Susanna Wesley. We heard the story behind the voyage of the SS St. Louis. We heard some of the tales of our fathers. We heard about the building of the Erie Canal. We heard about the vision of Branch Rickey, and now we are here. 12 months in, our last official hidden figure. We'll do others. And we're left with the question, who did we miss? Who, in our effort to lift up some people, did we forget about? Who did we leave on the cutting room floor? Who did we miss? Maybe we should pause for a second and just raise them up. Maybe it's those people who clean our buildings at night. That's part of what makes that legend of the final exam so hard, isn't it? That we all benefit from those people around us, whether we know it or not. Anybody who says they get by on their own should look in the mirror and notice their nose grow just a little bit longer. We all get by with a little help from our friends, yes, but it's more than that, isn't it? Most of us don't make our own cars or phones or homes. We want the best things, and we want them as cheaply as we can get them, and we're willing to sacrifice others for it. Who are those hidden figures in our lives? Who are those people who make our lives possible? How might we lift them up? Maybe you have somebody in mind, somebody that you think, I wonder who that person actually is. I wonder what their story is. I wonder what their name is. Maybe today's sermon ought to be dedicated to those people. One of the benefits of serving in a church is that we get to see all of these wonderful people who give not because they have to, but because they want to. And as we've been reading back through the bicentennial information, as we're looking back through our history, preparing for our bicentennial next year, we recognize that none of us are here except for the people who have come before us. However imperfectly, they did something in the time that they had. Part of why we're lifting up this Outreach Sunday once a month, where we'll highlight a different outreach ministry at church, is because we recognize all the good that people do. We might consider the Altar Guild. They come on Saturdays and they stay after on Sundays, all to make this space a little more beautiful, to give us something to look at when our mind starts to wander during the sermon. Welcome back. We might consider the Monday morning crew. They come and help fix things around the church. How simple could that be? They come to help fix things around the church. They volunteer their time because they happen to have those gifts. We might consider all of those who volunteer in our outreach ministries. The Dining and Caring Center, yes, but maybe this week as we prepare for rain, we ought to lift up some of those volunteers. Those who will come and have a meal with a family, who will play a game with a child, who will stay overnight just to make sure that someone else has a place to stay for the week. The thing is, this kind of selfless giving, this kind of love, not in the abstract but in the concrete, has been true in every church Emily and I have served. I think back to a man named Charlie at our first church. We saw him again a couple of weeks ago in Chicago. Despite some learning differences, he has worked his way up to be the head usher of that church, and he could not be prouder. He comes every Sunday with a smile on his face, and to this day is still the only person I know who asks permission to miss a Sunday. Just remember that. I consider Ricky, who I met on a service trip in Appalachia, who lived in one of the poorest places in the country, and despite being 19, could only say 2 words: yes and no. And yet somehow managed in those 2 words to preach a better sermon day by day than I'll ever preach in my whole life. I think of Nancy, who wrote a note to everybody on their birthdays. Think of Gloria, who cleaned the church because it needed it. I think of Jim, who at 89 still does what he did every Saturday for the last 40 plus years. Drives to the Amish market. As they're getting rid of their food, he collects as much as he can, divides it up into separate boxes, and then drives it around to as many families as he knows who needs it. A man who, despite being spit on for the color of his skin, never misses the opportunity to remind the people around him that we serve a good God. Sometimes we think good has to be flashy and big, and sometimes it can be. But most of the time, there'll never be a biography written about us. We won't get our name in the newspaper. We'll just find life, because that's how you find it, through love. If it feels overwhelming, the good news is you don't have to do it alone. That's why we're here. John Wesley's 3rd rule, you thought I forgot it, his 3rd rule is attend to the holy ordinances of God. What he means by that is find those ways that connect you to God and keep doing them. Friends, our prayer is that this is one of them. We come week after week to remind each other of how we're called to live in this world. We come to remind ourselves of how we're supposed to live the other 167 hours of our week. We come because we know that we all have this junk in our drawers that needs to be separated, that we have to find what is good and hold on to it, and more than that, to share it. We come because we know that none of us is perfect, but we're more perfect together than we are apart. God has told you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. May it be so. Amen.